Good evening. I'm Ruta Shabazi in for Marnie Hughes, and we begin tonight with a desperate appeal for help delivered directly to the UN Security Council by the president of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy appeared through a video link along with a chilling video of the toll Russia's invasion has taken on the people of his country. And he left little doubt of wartime atrocities committed by Russian troops, most recently a massacre of civilians near Kyiv. He put stories and faces behind the devastation, the nearly 1,500 civilians killed since the war began. Correspondent Tom Negevin is live at the United Nations. And Tom, these are some of the most graphic details we've heard to date.
You know, yes, Ruta Bay, adding to a real sense of urgency here and the message that the world can no longer stand by and watch a genocide unfolding in real time as Russia continues to deny that it's even going on.
Incredibly graphic video of wartime atrocities shown to the UN Security Council by the president of Ukraine,
The Russian military surge,
who described war crimes today faster than his translator could keep up.
they cut off limbs, cut their throats, slashed their throats. Women were raped and killed in front of their children.
In the Kyiv suburb of Busha, retreating Russian troops reveal evidence of a civilian genocide. There are reports of executions, forced relocations to camps in Russia, where prisoners are stripped of phones and IDs.
I do not need to spell out what these so-called filtration camps are reminiscent of. It's chilling, and we cannot look away.
Tonight, the spokesman for Russia's defense ministry says the whole thing was staged, as Russian forces launched strikes in western and northeastern Ukraine on what they describe as military targets, residents of Busha returning to mourn loved ones.
The reports are more than credible. The evidence is there for the world to see.
President Biden calls Vladimir Putin a war criminal who should face a war crimes tribunal.
This guy is brutal.
But putting Russia's president on trial before the world is easily said, almost impossible to do. Even the UN's highest court wasn't made for that. Any decisions it makes are implemented by the Security Council, where Russia holds a critical veto. Ukraine's president appeared today looking for something much more immediate. Otherwise, he asks, what's the point?
It had been.
Where, Zelenskyy says, is the security that the Security Council needs to guarantee? It's not there.
Well, tonight, some action, not so much from the UN, but from the U.S. and the G7. Already, Ruta Bay, as you know, humanitarian and military aid flowing Ukraine's way. Beginning tomorrow, sanctions for war crimes, new ones aimed at Russia.
All right, Tom Negevin at the UN, thank you. And Bryan Clark is an expert in naval operations and electronic warfare. He is a senior fellow and director at the Hudson Institute. Welcome to the show. So what did Putin learn from his invasion of Crimea? Has his goal the whole time been to get Ukraine to cede the eastern region of the country in order to stop the bloodshed?
Yeah, Ruta Bay, I think that is largely what he was intending to do, is get them to reach a negotiated settlement that partitions off the eastern part of Ukraine and much of the south to Russia. And I think what you're seeing now is the playbook from Chechnya being used to try to convince the Ukrainians to come to the table with some more concessions for Russia. Right now, they're in the middle of negotiations, and Russia is using this even though it's tragic, as a negotiating ploy to force Zelenskyy to come to the table and admit or allow the partitioning of his country.
It is just horrific. What's going through Putin's mind right now, based on your experience in the military?
He's clearly a little bit surprised at the level of resistance that they received in Ukraine and the ineffectiveness of the Russian troops. I think both of those things came as a surprise to him based on what we've seen from the intelligence that the U.S. government has provided and the British government. So he clearly thought this was going to be much easier than it turned out to be. And I think now they're sort of scrambling to come up with a second plan or plan B that allows them to save face and be able to declare a victory and gain some benefits from it in terms of territorial gain or perhaps economic relief from the current sanctions. But this is clearly not anticipated by him and his staff.
We just heard Tom Negevin's reporting there from the UN. What are the chances of Russia being removed from the Security Council, and what would that mean?
I think they're very small at this point. I mean, we've seen examples of countries in the past that have had these kinds of atrocities occur during conflicts that they started, Russia included, and it's not caused them to be removed from the Security Council. And as Tom mentioned, they do have a veto vote on whether that happens at all. So it's really unclear the methodology you'd have to use in order to get them off, other than just a general vote by the General Assembly. And it's unlikely that that would come out in Russia's disfavor. So I think they're likely to stay there. And I think right now you're seeing the ratcheting up to the most extreme sanctions possible on the part of the West.
And we saw these horrific images of civilians with their hands bound, what appeared to be torture. What does the torture methodology tell us? I mean, what is the message they're trying to send here? It's one thing to invade a country, massacre people. Why torture them on top of it?
Well, it's all about terrorizing the population that remains to try to get them to convince the government or get President Zelenskyy himself to decide that they can't stomach or live with any more bloodshed. And they're willing to concede to Russia some of the things that Russia wants, such as being neutral, not entering the EU even, and then letting the eastern part of the country and much of the south go to Russian control. I think that this is clearly designed as part of that playbook to now convince the population that they should just stop fighting, as opposed to winning in traditional military terms.
Do you think that was an order from the top?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that Vladimir Putin used in Chechnya. This is the approach they used to pacify or attempt to pacify Chechnya. That playbook is now being broken out and used here. I think this is definitely not their plan A. Definitely this is plan B or plan C, because they anticipated having a relatively easy run like they did in Crimea and in some of their operations even in Syria that have gone much more smoothly than what you've seen here.
And a new development today, it looks like civilians have been successful in getting out of Mariupol today via that humanitarian corridor, but aid groups have not been successful in getting in, and there are still people living there. There are people who are too old, who are invalids, they can't get out. What becomes of the people who are still stuck there and can't get help?
Well, you can see from the map here, it's clearly under Russian control at this point. It's going to be very difficult to get anybody out unless Russia allows it. And even then, it's going to be difficult, as we've seen, because it's hard to get the infirm out without better transportation. That's unlikely to happen. So you're really going to need Russia to eventually agree to allow all these people to leave and that humanitarian assistance can come in. That's part of the negotiation that I think Russia is trying to use in the discussions with Zelenskyy right now, and say, this is one of the things we're willing to give up.
Well, it's just so heartbreaking, but we appreciate you putting it in context for us. Thank you, Bryan Clark.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.